everyone. Welcome to another Live at 5. I am so glad to be in this space with the week that I have had. I am ready to get this party started. And, I've got some great questions coming in. And it's just been a wonderful journey. This week we focused on creating together. And I had a blast with the kids, and I didn't realize how much work it is to get them to be in front of the camera with me. So that was quite the treat. But they actually enjoyed doing it, so I was glad to have them. What else? A podcast episode was released last Sunday, Death to Tantrums. If you haven't had a chance, go ahead and check that out. I had a great time talking about death to tantrums. I just remember when my sugars were really little and they were going through that stage. I wish somebody could have told me the things that I knew now going into it, and that I could have been as reflective now or then as I am now about it. But it's been such a good just a good journey, just talking about it and being reflective of those things. In addition to, let's see, what else? As I'm going along thinking and talking at the same time, a blog episode was released, and another one is going to come out about being a united front as parents. And I think you guys are going to love this one. It's coming from a very personal space of our journey and how we had to learn how to unite together. My husband and I, we had to learn how to unite together in order to make sure that the kiddos were not taking over. And it is insanely different now with everybody being at home and being in that space where one kid can go to one parent and the other kid can go to the other parent. And so I really spoke from the heart on that one. I speak from the heart on all those blogs, but that one, it was just a special place because I didn't have the time to really reflect on it like I do other topics because I'm actually living it out. So, so you got raw emotion on that one. What else? I'm trying to think of all the announcements. If you have not had a chance to check out the Think Pink article, please check that out. That was such a pleasure and a privilege to be able to be interviewed by the Think Pink crew and just share my insights about homeschooling and about COVID and about being a parent and also a speech therapist. And honestly, going back to that space of just because you're an expert doesn't mean that it takes away from the human process. And we're all human and we're all going on our journey together. And the more that we can talk about this journey together and be intimate and open about what's really going on, the better we are together. And so that's why I always say, let's just get better together. I'm going to dive right into things because I've been getting some questions. You guys have been giving me some questions this week to where I'm like, I know how to answer this, but I need to answer it diplomatically. Again, this has been an insane week. There were some stuff that happened, some things that happened in the family, and we had 2 deaths in less than 7 days. So it's been quite the week. So just going through the process of grieving while still being present in this space has been a challenge, but not a challenge that could not be overcome. So just continue to pray for my family as we go through these very interesting times. So we're going to go right into things, y'all. Go ahead and start sending in your questions. I see your comments as you come, or as I will see your comments as they come through, and I'm just going to get right into it. Question 1 is, my 2-year-old is asking, what's that for everything? How do I stop it? Yeah. So thank you for your question. And I'm going to break this question down into just parts in order to just make sure that I'm covering the full scope of it. So 2-year-olds, they're usually at that age, they should have at least 50 words. So we'll just start there. Baseline foundation, there should be 50 words. You should be hearing more from them. And as you're hearing more from them, you should usually hear the increase of nouns. So what are nouns? Person, place, and things. things that are familiar to them, things that are familiar to their environment, things that are going on in their environment. Those are the action words. And so around 2, you should start hearing any kind of combination of like playing go, I eat, mommy bye-bye, daddy bye-bye, mommy play, want milk, want bubbles. Those kinds of things you're really starting to hear at that time. And you should really be hearing your little sugar combine words together. And so if they are asking what's that to everything, it could be a few things going on. Thing 1, if they are imitating from you and you're asking them what's that all of the time, what's this, what's that, what's that, what's this, then they're probably turning it back around on you and doing to you what you're doing to them. And I've seen that a lot where parents want to know what their child knows, but then it ends up turning into a quiz. And it's an accidental quiz, whether the parent knows or not. Like they're trying to figure out, what does my baby know? And what words do they know? And what information do they know? And what colors do they know? And what letters do they know? And so instead of it being like an interaction of where you guys are doing something together, and maybe you guys have some letters and you guys are putting letters together, it becomes, what letter is this? What is that? What is this? What color is this? And so they're just turning it back around on you. They could be. The other thing, going back into the foundation of your 2-year-old should have at least 50 words by 24 months. It could also be that they are not building up as many nouns and verbs. And so they're using what's that as a way to kind of substitute or supplement for the language that they're not necessarily gaining. So that's the first part. That's what could be happening. So from there, you got to figure out how to stop it. Well, great question. How do you stop it? Turn it back around on them. Either you ask them, what's that? Ask them back. Or you can kind of hold back on asking them what's that or for content questions so much during your conversation. So instead of asking about everything that is in their environment, again, you're going back to making it into a conversation. So that is how I would stop the what's that. I would stop asking them what's that. And then if they do have a strong vocabulary and they're still asking what's that, I would turn it back around, and that's when you can be blunt with them and tell them that, baby, you know what that is. You tell me, or what do you want me to know about it? And that way it turns that questioning into reciprocity. And reciprocity is how we learn how to really socially communicate and socially engage. Like, we don't want to talk to our kids in order to get information that they already know out of them. Like, we want to make sure that they're learning new things in their environment. And if it has nothing to do with them learning something new, then please, parent, do not answer that question. I hope that answers your question. Question 2, my toddler is throwing toys when finished with an activity or after a few minutes of play. Ooh. Okay. So, okay. Throwing toys. In my house, okay, I'm going to take the speech therapist hat off. Throwing toys in my house is like an absolute, like, nope. That is like flag on the play. I'm going to probably take the toy away after the first time I told you. And honestly, I might be kind of easing that toy out of the way if I notice any kind of throwing is taking place and it's not a ball and we're not in some kind of like ball play together. So if you notice your sugar is throwing activities or throwing toys or throwing when they're finished, then you got a few things that may be going on. One, I think they may be a little bit tired of what they're doing and they're using throwing as a way to express that they're done, but they're not necessarily using the words to express that they're done. If, before COVID and if they were in school, it might be behavior that they learned from kiddos on the playground to where they see other peers throwing toys and they think that that is an okay sign to show that I'm finished with something. The other thing that they could be doing is they could be throwing toys into, I don't know, an activity, making it seem like it is something, like it's a game. Instead of playing with the toy for what it is, they're turning it into a game. And we definitely don't want to teach them that throwing toys at any point, again, unless it's a ball, we definitely don't want them to think that throwing toys is appropriate. And so you kind of want to nip that in the bud. How do you do that? Well, that's when you're going to have to dig in there, get on the floor, sit down and play with them, and kind of analyze your play space. If you notice your sugar has, like, let's say it's Legos that they're throwing, and instead of giving them, the whole bag of Legos, maybe it's time to monitor the situation and give them maybe 5 to start with. Give them the 5 Legos, let them play with those 5 Legos, see how it kind of goes, and like say you're building something. If you want to slowly add or incorporate a few more into that play space, that's totally fine. If you notice that, it might just be that they're overwhelmed with the amount of toys that's around. If you have a play space that has a lot going on, then it's kind of difficult. Hello, Vanjie. It's kind of difficult to manage the play space. And so that could be another thing that's going on, to where either they have too many of one thing at one time, or the play space is a little bit overwhelming, or instead of cleaning up, they're using throw as a sign. If it's after a few minutes of play, I'm going to assume, and this is just an assumption, that there might be too many things around, and maybe we need to work on building up that attention and focus during play. How do you build up attention and focus during play? You got to remove a bunch of stuff from the play space and make sure that whatever it is that they have in front of them, that's what they're focused on, and there's nothing else that they can get at. And that after some time, then you clean up and you move on to the next activity. I want to make it clear too, if your toddler, if your child, if your loved one throws a toy, it is not your job to pick it up. This is a teachable moment. I want you to go and have them pick it up. Even if you have to walk them over to it, have them pick it up. If they pull tantrum on you and fall out on you, walk away, let them tantrum, leave the toy there. And when they're done, get them and take them to that toy and have them clean it up. Because again, it becomes one of those things to where you become the one responsible for taking care of cleaning up their mess, and they need to learn the cause and effect. If I throw toys, then I got to clean it up. If I do something, especially if it's not the first time that they heard don't throw toys, please make sure to tell them don't throw toys. But if it's the first or second time, still you want to set that precedent that we're not going to throw, this is unacceptable, and this is how we're going to handle that. Again, if it's an attention thing, then it might seriously be clean up your play space, organize your play space. And if you have questions on how do I organize my play space, ask me. I'll help you out with that. I love organizing spaces. So I would be more than glad if you send me a picture of your play space and you need some ideas how to get it together. I would love to help you with that. So that is how I would handle that. But definitely, one, do not allow them to throw the toy. Immediately get the toy out of the play space. Not the one that they threw, but the other ones that may be around. 2, have them get it. 3, if they tantrum, let them tantrum, and then get them and take them to go and take care of the cleanup. I hope that answers your question. I hope that helps with your question. Because that's a tough one, and I've seen that a lot. And sometimes parents thinks that it's funny, and it's funny for only so long. And when they start taking that stuff to the playground, it's not funny anymore. So please, parents, please take care of that one. The next question is, what words should my toddler be gaining? I'm noticing only I statements and environmental sounds. Great question. Very good question. I'm thinking as I'm reading it. I'm going to read it again, y'all. What words should my toddler be gaining? I'm noticing only I statements and environmental sounds. So I statements are I want I need, I this, I that. Environmental sounds are like if the airplane is flying, you hear meow, meow, or maybe animal sounds, the cow goes moo, or the duck goes quack, 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 quack. So those are environmental sounds. So for a toddler, we would expect them to be, and toddler, again, remember, starts at around 24 months. Sometimes we could say 18 months, but really like they're good into toddler years around 24 months. We should be hearing an increase in nouns and verbs. And so we want to hear that shift from like moo and ba ba and cluck 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 to more of actual words. Duck, goat, horse. So we want the actual word, not the actual sound anymore at that age. I would not reinforce. I would try my best not to reinforce, and we naturally do it. And what I mean by naturally reinforce, I mean like try your best not to repeat that sound and give it the label. So if you hear them saying like ba ba ba, oh, it's a sheep. You're right, the sheep does go ba. Let's put the sheep wherever we're going to put the sheep. Like the sheep is walking, the sheep is talking, the sheep is eating, the sheep is playing. If it's an airplane and they're going near, 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 then you can again give them the words. Oh, I see the airplane's flying. It's flying in the air. And go back to that conversational turn take versus giving it just the sound. It's great for them to know the sound as a precursor, but we want them to really get into like using those words because it's how they get through the day. This is also why I always encourage for parents to stay away from ABCs and counting and colors only, because it's natural for us to want to get our babies ready for preschool. But at the same time, if they don't have the reciprocity to conversationally turn take, like that's the building block, honestly, for everything else that they're going to need academically and socially, emotionally, all of that. And so you don't necessarily get that through environmental sound and only I statements. And you definitely can't get through the day by saying ABCs. I mean, think about it. You've never heard a sugar respond to a question. Are you hungry? B, right? Are you thirsty? Red. Like that's not necessarily natural communication, and it's not natural reciprocity. And so that's why I try to encourage parents to like talk about what's going on, talk about what you're doing, and not just talk, but listen to what your sugar is saying and use as many opportunities as possible to reinforce the words that they're saying. So that is a great question. I would definitely try my best again to start talking about things that they're seeing versus again reinforcing those sounds. Thank you for that question. That was a great question. Okay, I'm reading the next question. I suspect my daughter has autism, but my husband does not agree. What are some of the signs? I'm going to read it again. I suspect that my daughter has autism, but my husband does not agree. What are some of the signs? Well, it's funny. It's funny that the parent asked. There is definitely a difference between girls with a diagnosis of autism and boys who have a diagnosis of autism. And they really don't talk about, like science really doesn't talk about that. And the stuff that we see mainstream, there's really not a lot out there. They're just starting to publish some research showing that there are differences. I think a few weeks ago, maybe a month or so ago, I read an article to you guys about how girls are being either misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed or diagnosed later because the symptoms are so different. Oh my gosh, it's night and day different. Unless it's a moderate or severe case. And so when we think about autism, a lot of times we think of like the severe side of things, like either the nonverbal or the ones who have like a lot of sensory needs, where there's a lot of hand flapping, maybe some sensory sounds that aren't necessarily indicative of any kind of language. But with girls, it's so much different, especially with toddler girls and girls in general. This person who gave me this question, they didn't give me an age for the child. And so I'm going to start with the little ones just to show you guys why it's so different. So with little girls and little boys, at the toddler age, every child goes through the language boom. Usually with little girls, they go through the language boom and they're extremely imitative. And what I mean by they're extremely imitative is they are watching everything that the adults are doing and that their peers are doing. And so because girls are savvy, and this is, I'm talking about like maybe the higher functioning girls, and especially just because this question, the husband isn't agreeing, so he isn't seeing it. So I'm going to assume again that the signs are not really pronounced. But because the girls are so imitative, they can for a very long time slip through the cracks because they pick up on what's happening in their world around them and they kind of know how to respond to it. But there's still some little like splinter things that are going on that if you're paying close attention or you're in the field, you can kind of recognize that something might be a little bit quirky. And a lot of times in my field, they'll end up just calling it language delay because the signs are so subtle. And so little things that you'll see is they'll have the language, but they won't necessarily use it always appropriately. Or they'll have the language and they'll use catchphrases, catch terms. I had a little girl, and I got her pretty young. She was around 18 months. And when I had her, and on my caseload, not out of my body, like this was a client. But when I had her, she had language. She had some skills, but she didn't follow directions. And that's a telltale sign, is if they have that language and they're not following directions, you kind of wonder why, because if you have to understand language before you can use language. So the little sugar understood language, but she would never ever really show us that she could follow through with the things that we were asking her to do. Another thing the little sugar would do is she would randomly say, "Happy birthday." And it would be out of nowhere. And we would all kind of be like, me and her parents, or her parents and I, we'd scratch our heads like, why is the baby saying happy birthday? And it's nobody's birthday. And it's out of nowhere. Like we would be sitting there like playing with blocks or playing with Play-Doh or playing with puzzle. And out of nowhere, she'd be like, happy birthday. And so she's heard it over the years. And she knows, like, I guess she associated it with a happy time. And so I don't think she knew what to say in the moment independently. And so she was using happy birthday as a way to express her excitement about what she was doing. Right? And so I think that, again, girls are able to get away with it because they don't have the language delays a lot of times that boys have. And then again, going back into girls being extremely imitative, they pick up enough to where they can kind of get away with things that boys are kind of naturally not passive. That's not the word that I want to say. My little boys on the spectrum tend to be a little bit more passive than my little girls. And sometimes my little girls who have the diagnosis tend to be more passive. But again, it goes back to the level of severity. But for them, they kind of are able to get away with things that boys could not get away with. Another thing that I notice as they get older, to where they really have to like process language on their own and they have to think on their own. And as the social demands become more difficult, it's harder for girls to get away with imitating. they have to fit in. Whereas with boys are kind of like what you see is what you get. With girls, they're a little bit more careful and intentional about how they interact with the world around them. And so again, that's why they're able to kind of get away with it for so long. Matter of fact, I read a study recently that a lot of high school girls who did not have the diagnosis have anorexia associated with the diagnosis of autism. And so they have like this late diagnosis, but they find out that these girls end up also having anorexia. And a lot of it has to do with image problems. They're not quite understanding why they don't fit in with the world around them or with peers around them, but they're able to academically keep up. They're able to, participate in sports. They're able to mainstream, but socially something's there to where they know something's not right, and they end up having difficulties with their diet, or that's how they respond to it. So some of the things that I would look at for this parent would definitely be, do you notice that your child is using language but not following through? Or do you notice that your child understands language but is not using a whole lot of language? Do you notice that your child has difficulties with transitioning from one thing to the next? Like you have to give a lot of coercion or a lot of prompts to get them to move from one activity to the next. Or if their routine is interrupted, how do they respond to that? Do you feel like you have to, again, go into the coercion and convincing them that, they're going to do this? Do you notice that certain food textures or certain textures in their environment they don't enjoy? Do you notice sometimes their body tensing up? That's one of those subtle signs that I see in my high functioning girls, to where they'll get overstimulated or really excited and their bodies will start going. And it's really subtle. Some of them, do you notice they're walking on their toes? Do you notice that they have language, but they're not always using it appropriately? Those are some of those subtle signs, because when toddlers are babies, they're babies with words. Honestly, toddlers are babies with words. And so a lot of times as parents, we're like, oh, but they're making gains with their language because they have words. And so we automatically assume that because they have words, they're fine. But we also have to think about how they're using those words in order to get along in the environment around them. If they are using language only to get their wants and needs met, but not necessarily to participate with you, or if you notice that they're sitting down on the floor and you decide to join in and play, they don't want you to touch anything. Those are all those subtle signs that, maybe something else may be going on and it may warrant you to have a conversation. If you notice that, maybe they're not really interested in toys, but they're interested in objects, random objects around the house, but you have a house full of toys and they don't want anything to do with it. That's another real subtle sign that something is going on. And again, it doesn't mean that it is like a life sentence of doom, or something terrible is all of a sudden going to happen. It means that this is your baby and something is going on, and you're going to have to help them relate to the world around them in a much different way. But totally not what is the word slipped my mind. It's totally doable, and you can totally deal with it. But, it's just about knowing and understanding what's going on, and knowing your sugar, and knowing how to meet them where they are. I saw a question come through, and thank you for your question. I hope that helps with you and your husband in the conversation around that. If you guys still are not unsure, just before I get into this question I saw come through, just agree enough to get a third party opinion. Right now, I know with everything going on, you cannot physically go into the doctor's office, but maybe have it on your radar that once this is all over and said and done, and we're able to acclimate back into the community, that you guys just have a conversation with your pediatrician, or have a conversation with the school. And if the school won't help, remember, the school's job is to educate. And so they may not always be the place to go in order to find out if this is going on. If you need to have a developmental test done, go to your pediatrician and talk to them about that. So here is a question that's come through. When working with young kiddos and developing their language, should I be teaching MANs? Meaning, I want, I need, I don't want them to think this is the way they should talk. That's a great question. It depends on the kind of kiddo you're dealing with. I think using I want and I need in difficult, touchy situations as a prompt is totally appropriate. So let's say you're talking about a typically developing kiddo. I would say if they're on the brink of like tantruming, it's okay to slip that in there real quick. Okay, let's use your words. I want, and see if they'll respond to kind of like diffuse the situation to see if you can calm it down. If you're talking about a kiddo who is nonverbal or their language delayed, then I would definitely say you can use it, but you have to know when to slow the prompt down. And for you guys out there, Amanda's like a prompt. It's like a script. It's a way to like help the kiddo use language or help them get through. If you say I want, then they usually fill in the word or they repeat the whole sentence. I want, let's say, cookie. But I would say if it's a kiddo who has special needs, then I would say use it, but know when to start pulling back. So I'm thinking if you're using it every time they are trying to communicate something, then at some point you're going to have a game plan of when to pull out or pull back or hold back, because you don't want your sugars to be so prompt dependent that they can't communicate and process and think on their own. And that's why I always tell you guys to talk to the sugars, because even if they're not responding to you at that time, they still have to think about what you're saying and hold on to that information. And so at some point, they're going to respond back to you and respond to what you are saying. And so you want to make sure to figure out like when to hold back and not be so anxious to jump in. And so if the sugar is coming to you and they're trying to grab something out of your hand, let's use that as an example. Like they're coming and they're trying to like snatch something out your hand and you're like, oh, wait. And then you could give them the prompt, I want X, right? Because you don't want them getting into the habit of coming up to you and taking stuff that they shouldn't be taking. But you definitely, again, don't want them to get so dependent on you that they cannot think for themselves and process what they need to say in that moment. So that is how I would deal with that. And that is how I would address, helping them through learning how to use their language. And again, if you're talking with them and communicating with them, then this should be something that naturally happens over time. And when you are communicating, give them 3 seconds, because that's usually about the amount of time that we need when we're having a regular conversation with an adult or with anybody else. I say something. You say something. I say something. You say something. And so there's usually like that 3-second gap in between. Let's see. It looks like some add-on to this. I'm talking about typical kids. I'm so used to working with atypical kiddos that I find myself often using tools for typical children who do not need them. Great. You know what? That's a great follow-up. So here's the deal. By trade, I'm a speech pathologist. And funny enough, I became a speech pathologist at the same time I became a parent, right? So I don't really know how to separate the two, which is probably... I don't know how to separate the two, my poor baby. I'm kid you not. Oh my gosh. Anybody who is class 2011 at West Georgia knows this is true. Oh my God, that poor kid. I was pregnant with her at school. So she was hearing all this stuff. And then she came out and I had her on campus with me until she was like 7 months. So like she was like the test kid. She was my test kid. So I say all that to say she's typical, and I definitely I'm so ashamed. I definitely used everything I learned in speech on this baby. I think we started teaching her like sign language at like 5 months, and she was signing. Maybe it was earlier than that. Oh my gosh, that poor kid. But we used all that stuff for her, and honestly, I can't get her to shut up. I love her. My husband's cracking up in the corner. I can't get her to stop talking. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Oh my goodness. I'm sorry. Anyway, I'm gonna say all that to say, let me put I gotta be honest with you guys. So I'm gonna say I used it on my daughter, and her language was ridiculous at a young age, and she like naturally, when my son came along, she naturally used it on him, and then like he had us around, and by then like parents and grandparents and husbands and aunts and uncles, like they knew what to do by then because they had watched what happened with my daughter, and that poor guy, he didn't have a chance. So like everybody was on top of him by the time he came along. So like, does it hurt them? Well, it depends on your approach. If you're not using it in a way to where you're giving them that time to communicate for themselves, then definitely, yeah, it could be a stumbling block for them. So you have to be mindful that, don't be in such a rush to communicate or to get through the conversation or to get an answer out of them, that you're trying to speed the conversation along and not giving them time to think. And I think that's one of the hardest times or hardest things as a clinician that I had to learn, especially with early intervention, is like, you honestly, excuse my French, have to learn how to shut up and sit back and wait for things to happen. And it took a long time, because you got to think about it like this. As much as our little sugars are gaining from the world around them and learning from the world around them, they also need that processing time to hear and think about what they need to say and what they should be saying in the moment. So I say all that to say, like, it should not be a hindrance. But if you're rushing them along, or you're talking too fast, or you're trying to get a quick response out of them, like, they're going to pick up on that anxiety and that angst. And it's going to take away their ability to really think about the best answer or the best solution, or it can have adverse effects because they don't feel like you really want to hear from them, and they don't feel like you want to be a part of that conversation, and they end up taking a back seat to talking because you're doing all the talking for them. And so you don't want to put yourself in that position either, to where now your sugar doesn't even want to talk because you talk too much, and it's not on purpose. It's just because you just want to get the words out. You want them to get the words out. And so you have to be careful with that. That's a great question, a great topic. Like, you have to find that sweet spot. You got to find that balance between, yes, I want them to communicate. Yes, I want to help provide a good model of good language, but your modeling good language happens throughout the day, right? They're still observing the things that you're doing, and they're still listening to the things that you're doing. And so you're going to have to learn how to not be so scripted and so ready to be on, that you're giving them the space. And even honestly, for special needs children, or children with special needs who need more time, it's really essential for them to give them more time and to not prompt them, because a lot of times it's not that they can't master the skill. In most cases, is that they need more time to master the skill. They need more time to make sense of what it is that, you're wanting from them, or what it is that they need to communicate, or how they need to communicate with you. And so you have to know that child and know that child's needs, and find that space. And this is like the perfect time to really figure out what kind of need your child has, whether that's typical learner or atypical learner. Like, it depends. Learn your child. Learn, do they like you to do more of the talking? If they like you to do more of the talking, then you probably need to take a back seat to talking, so they can have more opportunity to talk more. If it's the other way around and they're a talker, then they're the one that probably needs to take a back seat to talking and do a little bit more listening. And so somewhere in there, you got to find that fine line and go from there and figure it out. So great question. Let's see. I do try to model language, especially in their natural setting, but I think I'm over prompting to keep tantrums down. Yeah. We've all been there. Sometimes you got to let it ride, right? As much as I believe that tantrums are, me and tantrums. I'm telling you guys, I wrote a blog about tantrums and I did a podcast on tantrums because I got a problem with tantrums. And I tried to, as much as possible, keep the peace. But my thing about a tantrum is that at some point, the sugar is going to have to deal with life's reality. Because a tantrum is simply this, that the child is not able to deal with what is going on. And that is whether it's a no, or whether it's a stop, or whether it's a redirection, or whether it's whatever it is. The toddler is using the tantrum to manipulate you to change your mind about whatever it is you said to them. And so that's where your thick skin has to come in, and your no has to be no, and your yes has to be yes, and your redirection has to be your redirection. And I mean, in some cases, you're going to have to let them deal with the reality that things don't always go your way. And I'm not going to always be there to coerce you through life. Like, it's not reality for any of us to have to coerce any child who turns into an adult through life. Like, it's not realistic. That's why we see adults now who are having tantrums out on the roads, the ones who cut you off and act real silly because you were going 75 in the fast lane and they wanted you to go 90. Like, that's an adult tantrum when they drive by and act real silly. Or if you're in the coffee shop and you see the person in front of you acting real crazy because their drink wasn't made right and it's just a drink, like, it's just a drink. Make the people remake it. You don't have to lose it over that. But when you see that person going off, it's usually an adult tantrum. And that's somebody who probably hasn't had the chance to deal with, how do I cope with when things don't go the way that I want them to go? So I would say you might be over prompting them to keep the peace, but at some point, peace is shaken and it's in the fire where we get diamonds, right? So let them go through the fire a little bit. They'll be okay. That doesn't mean you have to respond though. Let them go through it though. I would let them go through it and deal with it, and it'll make them all the better. So thank you for that question. Next question. I love these questions. Keep them coming through. And if you guys out there have any thoughts or response, remember, we are a community. So add your 2 cents. How do I approach a friend about their child's progress? I think their child might be delayed. Ooh. That's a touchy subject. That is a touchy subject. Think of it from the parent perspective. The parent has watched this sugar from the time they were born up until that moment of time, to where they've watched their baby make some kind of progress. Unless there was like a diagnosis to where, for life, your child is going to be in a situation to where they're just not going to make progress. You usually know about that. So this parent has probably seen their child make some kind of progress throughout their life. And you have to recognize that in that progress, sometimes parents have a hard time seeing or comparing their children's progress to other children's progress. And there's always a little bit of sensitivity around that topic because a lot of times, and this is unfortunate and it's not true because we don't have control over this, or else all of our children would be like Einstein IQ level genius, right? We don't have control over what comes out, but we do have control over character and attitude and how we shape that sugar, right? And so if your friend's sugar is possibly not developing typically or not meeting milestones, you have to be extremely sensitive about how you approach that subject and how you approach that topic, because a lot of times, again, parents they internalize that stuff as if it's something that they've done wrong. And it doesn't mean that. And I know that. And a lot of times outsiders know that, but a lot of times parents don't know that, who are in the fire and going through it. And so the best way to approach it, it depends on your relationship with that friend, right? If it is a friend who's extremely receptive and they've kind of made mention to it or alluded to, hey, something might be, going on, then I would say go for it, dig in there, but just again, be extremely sensitive about how you say it. Don't say, oh yeah, they seem like they're behind. Like, don't say that. That's the wrong thing to say. Wrong answer, right? Lose a friend. But maybe in a little bit more of an empathetic fashion or empathetic manner, just like, I noticed too that maybe they might not be hitting milestones, or maybe you don't even have to say that, because then they might be like, well, why didn't you tell me? You can just say, well, have you talked to your pediatrician? Have you talked to, if they're in school, have you talked to their teacher? Have you talked to somebody, just kind of filling out where they're at. If they have if they really seem like they have no idea that they feel like their child is making milestones or meeting milestones, again, you want to touch that with the utmost respect and sensitivity to the situation. I would probably refer them to an outside source, so that way it's not you saying it, but it's somebody else saying it. And this has happened to me a lot of times in the field, to where parents are catching it from family members who don't quite understand why the grandchild or the niece or the nephew, or in some cases the other parent, doesn't understand why the child is delayed. And I'll express to the parent, it's not your job for me to explain, or for you to explain it, but let me be the one to explain it. And so I say all that to say, like, having an outside party kind of come in and talk about it and talk things through makes it a lot better, and it takes that pressure off. In the cases for me, it took the pressure off the parent. In the case for you, it takes that pressure off of you, so you don't look like you're being judgmental. But if you have that relationship and it's coming out of sheer concern, and you have a really good filter on your the way that you express yourself, then you could bring it up. You could also direct them to look at some of my blogs, or podcasts, especially if it's subject specific, or just refer just in general. That's what I'm here for, like, to kind of take that, I guess, that taboo subject, take the taboo out of these subjects and break down these biases and these myths that we believe, because you didn't go into a lot of detail about what that progress is and the age of that child. I can't really give you a whole lot of information, but I would just say err on the side of caution and be extremely reasonable about how you approach that parent. I saw another question come through, and I'm going to check it out. Our 6-month-old is beginning to make audible sounds that sound like letters. How do we continue to encourage this? We have a bet on whether he says mama or umi, mom, first. Way to keep it fun. By talking back. And so if you are hearing those sounds, so there you're probably hearing by now, something like that, I'm assuming. Yay, because they're on track. And that makes me so excited. How do you How do you continue to encourage this? By doing what you're doing. Talking, reading, talking to them, making the building blocks of language. Sugar says something, you say something back. Da, 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 da. Oh yeah, I didn't know that. Da, 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 da. You don't say. Couldn't be. And that's how you keep the conversation going. That's how you keep encouraging them. Just let them keep talking. Respond back. Don't respond until they're done. Make sure to put like facial expressions with it, because that makes it funny, because then they'll pick up on how to read like other people's facial expressions. And by 6 months, they have a pretty good grasp on like recognizing like facial tones and like excitement, and when you're responding back to them, like they're picking that up. And so I would definitely continue to talk back to them. If you have a kiddo, Mahana, oh man, that girl, she's funny. So she said mama and dada at the same time. We were in Atlanta still, and we were in the room, my husband and I, and he was holding her, and she reached out to me and said mama, and then she turned around and looked at him and said dada, and that was her first words, but it was mama first, so it still counts as mama first. But she did say dada too. In his defense, she said dada too, but she did reach for mama first. So I'm rooting for mama or umi. I'm rooting for that. So yay. Can I get like 10 cents in on that bet, please? 10 cents on umi, please, for me. Thank you for that. Oh my goodness. So keep the questions coming in, because we're getting down to the wire on our last few minutes. I have 2 more questions to answer. If I do not cover them today or cover them all today, because y'all know I'm long-winded, I will definitely cover them next week. So the question is, I want to homeschool this fall. Where do I start? I knew there would be a believer. I just want to say, going into this, I knew somebody would come out believing in the dream that homeschooling is amazing. And just wait until you can actually go outside and do stuff while homeschooling. Game changer. When you can go to the park and the museum and the library, and you can actually do hands-on learning outside of the house. I'm excited for you. So yes, please do it. Yes. Okay. Now, where do you start? Just a little excited. You got to make some decisions first. It took me a long time to decide how I was going to homeschool these sugars, because I did not know what I wanted to do, how I wanted to do it. I knew about options available. I listened to other people's approaches. I listened all the way around, prayed, and eventually got led to go where we are right now. So you got to decide if you want to go traditional, which is like you certify yourself as a homeschooling group. And that means that you have full reign over the curriculum, the materials, your budget. You're covering it all because you are your own school, you're your own entity. You got to file that with the state. You got to look at what your state rules and laws are. The pro to that is that you have control over everything. The con to that is that you have control over everything. And so that means that you have to keep up with all the records. You have to keep up with all of their work. You have to keep up with all of the grading. You have to make sure that you keep a record of everything. Because if your child decides they want to go to college, they're going to be asking for some type of record form showing that your child is competent to do this stuff. So that is the thing about traditional. It's not impossible. There's so many homeschooling groups out there now that I'm sure like a seasoned vet will be able to give you everything you need to know. For a person like me, that is not a good fit. I need some kind of structure because I need some kind of structure. So next kind is a charter school group. Some charter schools now offer homeschooling, and I think some charter schools, depending on their rules and regulations, like it's pretty fluid nowadays. You're gonna have to check into it, especially if it's a group that you like, that you kind of already identify with. See if it is a good fit. The good thing about that is they a lot of times keep the records for you. And that takes that added stress and pressure off of you having to decide or figure out, do I have to keep, K through 12 work? That's no joke. Like, I get rid of stuff all the time, but I've learned to scan a few things and just keep some stuff just to show progress and make progress. And I also test every year too. I do language tests. I'm not ashamed. I do it because I just want to make sure. I did that when they were in school. Definitely doing it now. It's coming up real soon too. They don't know that yet though. They're going to know. So I would look at charter school groups. The benefits to that as well for the charter school groups is that you can participate in the activities that they have on campus if they have a school on campus. Also, private schools are another option. We looked at a private school and we really liked that group, but we just found one that we felt like would meet our needs better, but they were our second choice. What was cool about them is that they allowed the kiddos to participate in on-campus activities, certain on-campus activities. Others they did not allow, and we didn't like that. And so we really wanted it to be, which leads me to my next one, a hybrid approach. We are more of a hybrid homeschooling family. And what I mean by hybrid is, before everything broke out with COVID-19, the kids would spend one day on campus at school with same age peers. And they weren't necessarily working always on like academic textbook stuff, but they were working on grade level things. And it was really good because it gave me a day to kind of work on other things, and it gave us a break from each other. And it also gave them that structure of another adult in a classroom setting telling them what to do. And so we really, really liked that. I wasn't really necessarily concerned about the social piece, not for the older one, maybe for the younger one. It was more of a social thing for him, like to make sure that he still gets to see same age peers, but I wasn't really concerned about the older one. But even then, like, he was a little bit ahead, so sometimes there would be little difficulties in that. Okay, he was a year over a grade level ahead, and so, the little ones, it was some stuff. But we did like that approach. We also really liked the STEM program that they offered. So sometimes once a month they would go on campus and do really amazing STEM activities. They also had different field trip options and a lot of different things that we could be a part of if we chose to. As a matter of fact, they have a lot of stuff. We usually choose not to do it because, again, I became a homeschooler so I can homeschool, not so I can, have them in the classroom all the time. But I like the idea of being able to pick and choose what I want them to participate with or participate in, and they like to be able to choose what they want to participate in. So that is the approach that I kind of like. You also want to make sure that you're looking at, especially if you're going traditional, and even if you're not going traditional, look at homeschool groups around in your area just so you can have some kind of community, not just for them, but also for you. It's much different being a homeschooling parent than it is being a parent who drops your kiddo off at school. And it doesn't mean that the love is any different at all. It just means that the lifestyle is much different and the days are much different. So for us, if we're done at like 2:00, well, most of their friends are still at school. And so we learned this year that we really need community around us who can relate to that. Most of their friends who are in traditional school, when they come home, they have extracurriculars and homework. In their case, my kids' case, they're done with everything. And so they don't, traditional school settings, or the kids in the traditional school settings don't necessarily have as much flexibility as my kiddos do, because their day is different. It's just designed different, and everybody is getting their needs met in different ways. It's just the day is made up so much differently. So for us too, because we are doing a lot during the week, like our Saturdays, a lot of times are science days or building days. We like to build stuff. My husband likes to build stuff. And so our kiddos are always doing those kind of activities on Saturdays. So parties on Saturdays, well, they're hard for us to be a part of because we're usually doing some kind of crazy project or doing some kind of experiment. You can look at my husband's page and see all kinds of stuff these kids have done. You see pictures of Mahana in a dress on a roof, putting roof towels in and stuff like that, because that's how we roll. So you got to figure out what works for your family. Also, too, think about extracurricular activities for our family. Our kids play violin. One started at 3, the other one started at 4, and they've been playing, and they have that community. My son plays basketball. He has that community. And so we've just made sure to be intentional about their community, because we did not necessarily believe that everything they needed to know socially was going to happen on a playground yard. We were more along the thought of, we want to put them in community with people that they can relate to and people that they identify with, and not people that they're just kind of placed into a classroom setting with. And luckily for us, our kids get along with everybody. They don't know no strangers, so they can get along wherever they go. But that was honestly our thought process. So, you have to figure out what you value. You have to figure out what your family values. If you know you need a break and that you need alone time, you need to find a hybrid program. For me, I need not only the break, but I also need to write, and I also need to create, and I need, that space to be able to do that. And so having that hybrid approach really helped. And I also love my education coordinator. She is amazing, and she's so supportive, and without her, I don't think that I would have been able to hang on as sane and as supportive of this process, because it's just a third set of eyes looking in, outside of my husband and myself. And also with my husband being home a lot more now, he's able to do a lot more with them, which is what we actually planned to do initially. But then it things shifted. But now that he's around, he's even, part of the conversation a lot more. Like, he's always been part of the conversation. I guess that the better word is part of the process. And so you just have to figure out what works for you guys. Is one parent going to be the primary educator? Are you guys going to co-teach, or are you going to do computer-based learning? Are you going to do private learning? It just depends on your needs. So that is how I would approach that. I think you're going to do great. I think you're going to do amazing. Most people who homeschool really just want to connect with their children in a different way, or they feel like they're not getting what they need, or their child is not getting what they need outside of the institution they're in, or they feel like whatever it is they feel like. Usually the person that goes into it is pretty passionate and convinced. Just make sure to do your research, use wisdom, and have a body of people around you who will speak truth and life into you, especially when you want to throw in the towel. So that would be my encouraging words of the day for that. And the final question, it's another homeschooling question, but it's from an accidental homeschooler. I call you guys accidental homeschoolers who were thrown into homeschooling and did not start off wanting to homeschool. This is a great question and a great topic. So here it is. And this is my final question of the day. The homeschooling is not my problem. The technology is. How do I help my child with all of the technology needs in order for them to learn? Man, let me tell you, I've become, like, in a matter of what are we on, like day 60, 65, 66 of distancing? Yeah, I have become like well-versed in Zoom and House Party and all kinds of other apps that I regularly would not, they're not even apps, they're groups that I would not regularly try to become a part of or be a part of. And so I understand, especially if you are technology challenged or technologically challenged like I am, I understand your pain. I would say give yourself grace and a day. You need grace because you need to breathe. And you need grace because you're going to have to kind of rewind back, take the time to learn the technology. Because it's going to be impossible to teach technology or teach anything or navigate anything to somebody else that you yourself don't understand. So you got to understand it first, and you got to take time to understand it first. YouTube has a bunch of tutorials. Most of these platforms that are out now, if you go to their websites, they have tutorials. School IT, they have been IT. Oh my gosh. Nobody talks about IT being the unsung hero right now. Like, IT is keeping this world going. Like, IT needs to be called essential, because without them right now, all those IT people navigating and troubleshooting, we would be in trouble. Let me tell you, this whole world would be shut down without IT right now, troubleshooting. I've called so many at this point. If I'm not calling my husband, I'm calling somebody else. Like, I have let go of my pride, and I ask questions. I don't care. So I would say, like, call the IT at your child's school. Have them help you. Like, usually I'm yet to meet an IT person who doesn't have like the heart of a teacher and who doesn't want to like get in there and really make sure that you win. Remember, technology is just language. It's just a different form of language, and you have to figure out how to speak computer language. That's what I tell myself all the time. And once I tell myself that, like, I'm good to go. So I would say learn the language, figure out what it is you're trying to do, and then go back and try to teach that to your child to help them navigate, because I would rather your child be doing something than nothing. But if it gets to the point to where you guys ready to kill each other, everybody take a break, take a breath, woozah, and come back to the table. We've all been there. I hope that helps. Thank you for your questions. I appreciate you guys so much. I appreciate this time so much. If you haven't had a chance to do so, make sure to go and catch up on past podcast episodes of I've Got This Kid. You can find me on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and Podbean. We are continually growing. We have over 700 listens. Let's look at you guys out there. We are really working and striving to get better together. We are striving to just, be this community that changes the world with our actions and the actions that we impart on our kiddos, because we have control of that. We might not be able to control anything else, but how we respond to our kiddos, what we do, what we impart, we can definitely take a part in that. Also, if you have not done so already, follow me on Twitter at Cherina Williams 1. There's no S on that. On YouTube, you can now find me. You can find not just today's episode once it's over. You can also find past episodes of the live Q&As on there. And I'm also doing live video of my podcasting now. So you can also find that on YouTube at Cherina Williams, CCC, SLP. You can also find me on Facebook. I'm passing out gems and throwing nuggets and gems and stones and all kinds of good stuff throughout the week. We even did a Create Together series. I got the kids in on it, and they were doing stuff. And Christian, y'all see him, he all over the place. He all over the place, but I did it, and we made it, and nobody died, and it was fun. And there's Play-Doh everywhere. You guys will see that later. It's woo, but it's been fun. Like, I've been having a great time, and the kids want to do more recording, especially that Christian. He thinks, he thinks he's a superstar, but you know what? Let's let him be great, and let's let him think that. So go ahead and look out for those on Facebook this week. You can find me at Cherina Williams there. And then you can find me on Instagram at I've Got This Kid _podcast or at Cherina Williams SLP. I think that's it. So until the next time, you guys, take care. Can't wait to see you guys again. Keep sending in those questions.